of the Chief Warden. So, councillors, we'll move to the agenda now. These apologies, councillors. Have some apologies, Councillor Gross.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move the apologies be received from Councillor Simic, Councillor Copsey and Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brand. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting were the ordinary meeting on the 7th of November 2018. Are there any questions relating to these minutes? Then can I have a motion to confirm the minutes? Councillor Baxter to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter that's being discussed tonight? Councillor Baxter.
I, Councillor Tim Baxter, declare that in relation to item 14.4, new lease Port Melbourne Yacht Club, that I have an indirect conflict of interest due to the receipt of an applicable gift in this matter.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. At that item, we'll ask you to excuse yourself for that item. Number 4, which is petitions and joint letters. We've got 2 joint letters tonight, councillors. Item 4.1 is a joint letter together with a petition opposing a proposed mobile base station for Optus and Vodaphone to be located on the southwest corner of Ormond Esplanade and the St Kilda Street, Elwood. And we've got no speakers to that. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are none. Okay, so just that this recommendation is that we receive and note it, and we're responsibly provided at a future council meeting. So do I have a mover for that? Councillor Crawford to move and Councillor Pearl to second. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, item 4.2 is a joint letter request for permanent alcohol bans on St Kilda foreshore. And councillors, again, we've got no speakers to that item. Do you have any questions of the officers? So just to be clear, this is a recommendation to receive and note the joint letter and provide a response back at the ordinary meeting of council on the 5th of December. So do I have a mover for that? Councillor Pearl to move and a seconder. Councillor Brand. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Pearl? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so the sealing schedule, item 5, and we don't have any documents requiring sealing tonight. So, now, prior to public question time, councillors, and pursuant to council's meeting's procedural local law, the CEO has requested, and I've given consent to, the adding of an agenda item to the meeting tonight relating to a presentation of award. I'm getting quite a few of these recently. Regarding the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project, so MREP, winning the City Switch Partnership of the Year Award for Victoria. So, Ms Rosick, would you like to say a few words about that?
Certainly. Through you, Madam Mayor, in addition to winning the 2018 Premier Sustainability Award in the government category, last night we were notified that and awarded the Victorian City Switch Award in the partnership category for the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project as one of the key partners. This award recognises Council's leadership in developing successful partnerships to deliver a strong action on climate change. MREP is a transformative project that has driven investment in new renewable energy generation, delivers strong financial and environmental benefits for all project partners, and enables other organisations to replicate our approach to partnerships. We've been advised that more than 50% of Victorian local governments are now participating in projects like MREP. MREP will support the construction of a new wind farm at Crowlands, 20 kilometres northeast of Ararat. It will be owned and operated by Melbourne-based clean energy company Pacific Hydro. And more importantly, it will reduce Council's gross greenhouse gas emissions by 87%, or 9,500 tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions equivalent each year for the next 10 years, which is very pleasing and in line with our Act and Adapt strategy.
Okay, now we'll move to item 6, which is public question time, and we have one person that's requested to speak, and that's Tanya Canfield. Welcome, Ms Canfield. If you could please pop up to the table here, pop your microphone on and state your name and suburb, please. And welcome back.
Is that working now? Yep. Okay. So my name is Tanya Canfield. I am a resident from South Melbourne. So the question that, so thank you to yourself, Lord Mayor, and councillors for allowing me to come and speak about this topic again. So my question specifically I'm directing towards Peter, and I understand that Lily may answer in response, but my question is to yourself, Peter. So my concern is that on more than one independent hygiene testing report, we have the presence of asbestos, which is disturbed at 41 to 49 Bank Street, South Melbourne. Both of these reports that I commissioned, I have provided to City of Port Phillip Council, WorkSafe and the EPA. But in return, what I have failed to see is what I consider to be an appropriate and a measured response to deal appropriately with that. So despite informing all of you, we have disturbed asbestos directly across the street from where I reside. And I also requested July, August, September, October, and again in November, a full hygienist report from all of these three parties. Not one of you has provided that. I have not at any point in time had WorkSafe or the City of Port Phillip Council or the EPA stand in front of that site informing myself and the public it is safe. Friable asbestos is not safe, and disturbed asbestos, which is what the soil and building rubble material is spreading in my community in an ongoing manner. So my question specifically is, what is the council going to do to assist with this? Along with, at the previous meeting, the council informed me that as soon as WorkSafe provided a written, measured, appropriate response, that would be provided to me. And I'm still waiting on that response from WorkSafe from July when I originally requested it.
Thank you, Ms Canfield. You can take a seat. Yep.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, I'll take that question as the CEO of Council. And I'll speak on behalf of Council. Ms Canfield, Council sent to you on the 2nd of November 2018 a detailed response to your concerns about asbestos at 41 to 49 Bank Street, South Melbourne. And further to that letter, an inspection of the site was undertaken on the 7th of November by a licensed asbestos assessor in the presence of WorkSafe. A clearance certificate has been provided to WorkSafe in accordance with legislative requirements, and WorkSafe advises that the site does not pose a danger to the public. Council is satisfied with the information provided by WorkSafe. Any new information or further requests for information relating to clearance of the site should be directed to WorkSafe, who are the responsible authority.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Has Ms Canfield got a copy of that a clearance certificate?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would be up to, I believe that would be up to WorkSafe to provide, but I'll just check with my colleague, Ms Rosling.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the CEO is correct. It would be WorkSafe would need to provide that because it's not council property. It's it's been provided to WorkSafe. We've just had copies provided to satisfy our municipal building inspector that the works have been undertaken appropriately.
I'll speak on behalf of Ms Canfield. I'm sure would be quite interested in seeing a copy of it. How would she go about getting a copy of that clearance certificate?
Ms Canfield could contact WorkSafe directly. I understand you're in regular communication. However, we're happy to pass that request on to WorkSafe on your behalf.
Thanks, Ms Rosek. Thank you.
Am I able to say one further thing? No. Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Canfield. Councillors, question time for you. Do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. On the last couple of issues of diversity, 4 of the 12 pages are allocated to the calendar of events, and there's things in here like such as Spooktober, for example, which I think is a fabulous event held here at the Town Hall. A couple of things that were missing, I'm just wondering why they were missing, was there was no mention in either diversity about our Remembrance Day ceremony or the Victorian Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women Australia ceremonies that took place on and around Remembrance Day. I'm just wondering why those two events were missing. There was a large article about Remembrance Day and the opening of the Remembrance Garden in Port Melbourne, but no actual note of our key civic events around this very important day.
Ms Fraser.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that feedback, Councillor. I will look into the details as to why. Most of the information within diversity is driven by the community through our provider who puts together diversity, and I'll make sure that we provide that feedback to them and that we're more aware of important municipal-wide events and make sure that we cover those off in the future.
Just a follow-up question on that one is also, why is the council meeting schedule not included in diversity to inform our community of when council meetings take place, be it on the broadcast or live in person?
At this point in time, the information that we generally provide in diversity is aimed at the community around their own community events and topics that are of interest to them specifically. We do provide other channels to promote council meetings, but we can actually look into that in terms of further additions of diversity.
Councillor Crawford.
But can I clarify, there is a long lead time for diversity, so some events may not be scheduled that far in advance to be able to be included. Just to clarify that we're not ignoring events, but some organisations may not have scheduled specific times or places that far in advance.
That is true, yes. We do try and provide as much opportunity to, as we move through that process, for community events to have information available, but there is definitely a period of time where we do need to go into production to deliver the magazine.
Thank you, Ms Fraser. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Pearl.
Just one more quick one. Can officers please clarify if commercial, community or political advertisements are allowed on nature strip, power poles or footpaths or footpath fences? If not, what are the penalties in these actions? The reason I asked the question is on the way here today, I see a Labor Party has put up adverts on power poles in Chapel Street, and there's a number of political parties that have adverts at the moment this afternoon on the way here on council property on Kerford Road Canterbury Road in the medium strip, and also on the pedestrian fences, I would call it, on the roadside of the footpath also in some of those areas. Just wondering, given those signs are authorised, what penalties or actions will be taken by council if these are reported?
Ms Rosick?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that can be quite a complicated question because there are two forms of legislation that govern the placement of signage. One is the Planning and Environment Act and the other one is Council's local law. And in regards to commercial, generally Council have provided permits for activities associated with footpath trading, so in regards to commercial signage. In regards to community, we have a permit process which is governed under the local law and managed by Council's events team, and there are guidelines regarding where they can be located, the signage can be located, and for how long and what purpose, and also eligibility for that signage. In regards to the political signage, it depends where it's located. If it's located on people's private properties, there are exemptions under the Planning and Environment Act. For the ones, if there are some in locations that aren't permitted, we're happy to have a look at those. The practice normally is that we require, or we issue a notice and request that those signs are removed, and only if the person does not comply with that direction may a fine be issued, and it could be around $1,000 if it's issued by an officer, or up to $2,000 if it's dollars if a penalty is awarded through the magistrates court. I'm not aware of us having to do that of recent times, and would only impound any signage if it was a hazard to someone who was walking past. So happy to review any signage that you've mentioned this evening. Thank you.
And I've got another question for you, Ms Rosick, as well. I've just seen all the pay stay signage go up all over the city, and just wondering how the implementation of that's going. Has there been any teething issues that we should be aware of? Or maybe it's...
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can only provide limited information. Unfortunately, the officer was sick today and I haven't had an update. But I understand that it is installed and it is working well. We haven't enabled the function of people being able to locate free vacant spots across the municipality because we don't have enough sensors in at this stage to warrant that. But as far, the information I have to date is that it's going well, but I'll take that question on notice and provide further information at a later date. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Rosick. Okay, if there are no further questions, I will now move to presentation of reports. And we've got our first one being 9.1, which is the Friends of Suai, Covalima, which is the annual report. And councillors, we've got one person that's requested to speak. I'd like to ask Megs Alston, please. Welcome. If you could pop on your microphone and
thanks very much,
you're here in your
Madam
capacity
Mayor.
to speak to the annual report.
Okay, yes, thank you. And thanks very much for the opportunity to present the 2017-18 annual report of Friends of Suai Covalima to Council. So the annual report, which contains a lot of information about all the accomplishments here and in East Timor in the past year, and I'd just like to highlight some of these for your attention tonight. In June 2018, a shipload of computer equipment, which was donated by the City of Port Phillip, arrived in Suai, and this included desktop computers, keyboards, monitors and laptops. And they will be handled by the social enterprise, which is managed by Infotimo and the Covalima Community Centre, which is, our partner in Suai. This activity generates income from selling and repairing computers, as well as using some of them for IT training in the district. And there always seems to be a demand from students and even from some of the local government departments in the district for IT training, so they are always put to good use. So that's been a great benefit this year. The Successful Scholarships program continued. This program was developed in 2012, and since then 140 scholarships have been provided for post-secondary and education and training, and for some technical secondary studies. There are 30 students currently studying vocational courses, including nursing, teaching, community development, construction, agriculture and electrical studies. And as at the end of the financial year, 54 graduates have been employed, approximately 50% of those who've graduated, which is quite a good result given the context of very high unemployment. So as well as building capacity to benefit the district of Covalima, the scheme enables all those young people who are unlikely otherwise to have gained employment to find jobs. The Village Lighting Scheme is another activity which was implemented during the year. That has seen rooftop solar PV systems installed in 40 households in a small hamlet which is off the grid and doesn't intend to be connected to the grid. And that provides house lighting and the facility to charge a phone and a rechargeable torch. This community reports social, health and economic benefits from no longer having to rely on kerosene lamps in their homes. In July 2017, a group of 6 Friends of Suai Covalima volunteer election observers travelled to Suai for the East Timor parliamentary elections. They were well received in Suai, where they visited several local voting centres, and this activity was a good example of strengthening the relationship between our two communities. In November 2017, we supported a delegation from the Covalima Community Centre, including some local district agricultural personnel, to visit the town of Bagia in Bacau, another district quite a way away, to observe and learn about a successful reforestation program called With One Seed. This was introduced there about 7 years ago. It provides education, training and income to poor farmers from subsistence communities who are now growing and looking after the trees. The Covalima Community Centre wants to replicate this program in Covalima, where there is significant deforestation, and Friends of Suai want to support it financially. An added bonus of the scheme is that it has gained gold standard accreditation for selling carbon credits. And this is the aim for Covalima as well, so that once it's established, it provides the opportunity to individuals and organisations to purchase carbon credits to offset their carbon footprint. So looking ahead, we aim to strengthen our fundraising from this year onwards so that we can support this project whilst continuing with scholarship support. They're the two major funding challenges that we have, I suppose. Our work here in the City of Port Phillip to raise funds in the 2017 to 18 year resulted in approximately $50,000 raised from events and from general donations. So these are just some of the highlights of last year's work, and Friends of Suai wants to thank the City of Port Phillip for its continued support for this program, and thank you for the opportunity, as I said before, to present the report.
Thank you very much, Ms Alston. Councillors, just wondering if you would like to ask Ms Alston any questions regarding the annual report she's presenting. Councillor Goss?
What's the most exciting thing that's happened this year in relation to this whole enterprise? What's your big highlight?
The big highlight? I would say that looking at the overall benefits, probably the scholarship programs had the biggest impact in the last year because it's grown in size, so there are more people undertaking scholarships, and then having tracked their progress, it's been really, gratifying, I suppose, to see how many of those young people have gained employment. It's hard to choose one thing because there are 3 or 4 ongoing projects, but the Village Lighting Scheme's been a great initiative, and I think this new With One Seed, which we intend to pursue because they really want to do it there, that's going to have a very big impact if that gets implemented. but that's to come.
Thanks very much. I would love that photo of the thatched roof with a PV cell on it. It's like...
Yeah, exactly. It says it all.
Shock of the new.
Thank you. Yeah.
Councillors, any questions of the officers? I'll just... then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Baxter to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'm very happy to move this motion to accept another annual report. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with the Friends of Suai group over the past it's 2 years now, actually. It just not only a lovely bunch of people to spend some time with, but also just driven and achieving real results, which is always good to see. I'm particularly Megs, I know you've got a favourite, which is the scholarships. My favourite is the Village Lighting Scheme. I think that's like one of the coolest things that you can do there, and particularly when it comes to when they run studies on electrification of villages in India and stuff like that, what they see is education rates among women rise, and all sorts of other benefits sort of come out of that, which then leads to better health outcomes and all sorts of things. So it's really fantastic, and to see also as a sort of a bit of an eco warrior, to see that that we're looking at the next project being a reforestation project is just amazing, and to see all of the benefits that come out of that. So I have seen definitely firsthand when the CCC what's Alberto? What's his role? The coordinator, yes, came to the city of Port Phillip. We could see the real bonds of friendship that exist between Suai, Covalima and the city of Port Phillip, and that's all due to the hard work of a number of volunteers and and a little bit of support from the city of Port Phillip, and those benefits just make such a huge difference. So I'm really, I really like spending time with the group, and the work that you do is really important as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Gross.
I'd just like to say that this is one of the more uplifting things we do, to reach out beyond this relatively affluent community and provide the sort of assistance that has now been provided for well over a decade is great. It's a good thing we do, and I'm happy to support the reception of the annual report.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Anyone else like to speak? And I'll just quickly note and thank you very much for your work and the committee's work, and also a councillor that is on that committee. But I also really enjoyed meeting again Alberto Barros, who came out only about a month ago, I think, and that was beautiful. And he did speak to us pretty much everything you've mentioned today, so it was wonderful to see that along with the pictures that were shown. So thank you for all the work you do, and please pass on our congratulations to the committee for another lovely annual report. Councillor Baxter, would you like to close?
I don't know, I think I said a lot. I did forget to say thank you though, so thank you.
I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we'll move to item 11.1, which is the submission, the review into the National Waste Policy 2009. And there are no one's listed to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Gross.
Sorry, I should have foreshadowed this. When I was looking at the recommendations, one thing that struck me in relation particularly to the organic waste was the issue that for some councils it's harder than for others. I just wondered how we take into account that very remote councils and inner urban councils have particular difficulties. And should we allude to the latter in our response?
Ms. Pinder? Yes.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. The issue of organics has been or is being addressed by the federal government through a separate report. That report is due out any minute now at the end of this year. It's supposed to be addressing both urban and rural communities. So we've asked in the recommendation that the information be transparent and available as soon as possible so we can comment on that information as well.
Any other questions, councillors? No? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Gross to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, other than to thank the councillors for preparing the answers there. I think they were great.
The officers?
The officers, sorry. God forbid the councillors be entrusted with any real work, but anyway.
Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Crawford.
My 2 cents worth is I particularly like around the principle 3, which is about using 30% of recycled content in infrastructure and procurement by governments by 2030. And also that the officers have recommended that we also need to look at the process of making and using these items. That should also be part of the consideration. I thought that was particularly excellent. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Gross, would you like to close?
No, thank you.
Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. 14.1 is the assemblies of councillors. We have no one to speak to this item. Councillors, any questions? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Pearl to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? No. And Councillor Gross, would you like to speak? No. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Okay, and then 14.2, this is the September 2018 quarter financial report, and I just wanted to outline that we have an alternative officer's recommendation, which I think you've got a copy on your desk there. So perhaps I'll read that before I ask if you've got any questions, and that is that Council, 1, considers an item of urgent business in relation to bringing forward... Hang on. Wrong one.
Sorry, it's this one.
Yes, got it. Yep. That Council 3.1 notes that the following the September 2018 quarter review, the organisation is projecting a full year net cash surplus of 2.42 million, which is 1.74 million favourable compared to budgeted cash surplus of 0.68 million. 3.2 notes attachment 1 and 2 being the comprehensive income statement converted to cash, September 2018, and accompanying explanatory notes. 3.3 approves up to 1.43 million of unbudgeted expenditure and notes attachment 3 being the unbudgeted initiative requests, September 2018, and this is a new bit as well, and further notes that the second item on the schedule, re St Kilda Town Hall, replacement of the air conditioning system, Port Melbourne room, $150,000 has been removed. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl.
This is, from memory, I didn't go back and look it up, but this is substantially larger than what we did at the same time last year. Is there any reason for that? I think from memory last year we had some budget considerations around staff adjustments on Fisherman's Bend. I haven't looked it up, so I could be incorrect, but is there any reason for this being conceivably, from what I can see, reasonably substantial?
Excuse me, through you, Madam Mayor. I think from recall, Councillor, the number last year was, I think, close to $1 million, and it was made up of 5 or 6 items at this time of the year. The 1.5 million, approximately 1.5 million that's before you now, is obviously higher than that amount. It reflects the fairly positive financial start that we have had to the financial year of 18-19 with respect to being in a position to fund a number of these unbudgeted initiatives that have come up through the organisation. Some of them relate to bringing forward expenditure from the 19-20 budgeted year, and then a number are opportunistic from a perspective of actually doing some work that can be delivered in this financial year and which has been assessed with a high rating for value for money.
If I can add to that, Mayor, essentially we've got some, at this stage of the year, we've got some underspend savings and deferrals on our capital program. A large part of this expenditure is for capital works, particularly around our buildings, where we know that we need to up our expenditure in that space over time to ensure that we meet our obligations to maintain and renew those assets appropriately. And we are, historically, we've been underperforming on our building asset renewals, and so we've taken that in this instance, an opportunity with some surplus funds, enough time in the year to invest in some of those needed works. And there are some other items in there that are opportunistic to come forward at this point in time as well.
Follow up, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Crawford, you had a question, did you?
I'm just curious as to why we've removed the air conditioning request from the original motion.
Through you, Madam Mayor, a timing phasing issue with respect to there was a PCG of the building retrofit engineering team, and it was found that there was actually space within that budget to actually attend to this item of expenditure. Now that will be subject, as I referred to in some recent communication with you, to a full value for money test, which I think aligns with the councillor requests from recent briefings.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Yeah, questions in relation to deferral of capital items. That saved our bacon to some extent last year in terms of the budget position, and the glossiness of this budget position appears to be caused by the same thing in terms of asset renewals. What's our problem with not being able to deliver on those? Are we better performing in terms of we're overstating budgets, we're being too conservative, so to speak, on budgets, and we're performing better? Or are these actual deferrals? Why are they year after year seem to be being rolled forward, and what are we doing to address that problem? Because ultimately it makes our budget look nice, but reality is we're not getting the work done that we budgeted for each year.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's a perennial question and issue that we work through in terms of delivery of the capital program. What we do try and do so that we don't overstate, we're mindful of the financial performance of underspending the capital program, is generally, if we think we need it in future years, we put it into reserves. So the reserves build up and provide a funding source, which means that it's not fully masking the financial position for the year. So we try to be transparent about that. And we try not to use capital savings to fund operating expense unless it's absolutely necessary. In terms of, it's a big program, and the budget is set at a certain time each year, and there's different levels of analysis and rigour that go to each project at that point in time. And as we say, some will be in delivery, and the certainty around costs is pretty good. Some are at concept phase, and we still haven't done design work, and the level of confidence around the budget is not great. What we do try and do is to make sure that we do get best value, is that we've introduced this budget process so that if there are things that need to be moved because timing's not right, we can bring some stuff forward. We can bring in some new projects that are needed, particularly if they relate to things like building safety and things like that, so that we are trying to be more agile with our management of the portfolio so that we can spend more of the budget on worthwhile things. We're not just adding things for the sake of spending. And we've invested over the past few years on our enterprise portfolio management or project management capability. We still have some challenges. We've discussed that with councillors previously, and we'll bring it back again. later in the year at the mid-year budget review around our capacity to attract and retain project managers, and in some cases that impacts the ability of delivering some of these projects. It's a very heated construction market, capital projects in particular. There's a lot of big government projects going on at the same time, and unfortunately when we seem to attract some quality people, it's hard for us to keep them, and that has had some impact. But I believe in this proposal that we've brought to you tonight, we've done it early, we believe we can deliver these things, and they represent good value.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? I have a couple. Just on the workplace management tools and support, was there any ability to find $100,000 in the substantial budget that we approved in the customer experience program, Mr. Carroll?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I did have a look at that. There is a substantial budget for customer experience. We have, during a recent procurement process, allocated more than half of that budget, or contracted more than half of that budget, and we're about to commence another procurement process shortly for a range of the systems that will need to be replaced. While improving our asset management processes, practices and systems was part of the scope of that works, it wasn't this kind of tool wasn't contemplated as part of it. If the council was of a mind to for me to include that in the scope of works, I could, but there could be a risk that I might overrun the budget. I won't know for another 2 years.
Mr. Carroll, so what we're looking at here is the quarter for September. Or even Mr. O'Keefe, are there any likely further requests as a result of the December review that you can foreshadow?
Through you, Madam Mayor, at this stage I'm not aware of any. This is a process that we run 3 times a year, and effectively unbudgeted initiatives are brought through by officers to ELT for review. So it is a disciplined approach that we do run in this time of the year, February and then in May. There are obviously risks that we will see emerge between now and the 30th of June with respect to a number of issues that potentially are unforeseen at this point in time. We will actually review those and report back to Council and obviously with ELT support bring any unbudgeted initiatives in February. But at this stage I'm not aware of any that are rising that would be in that scope.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there are emerging risks for the council, but there are also a range of things that we're currently discussing subject to procurement, where we expect that there may be some projects that come in over budget, some projects that come in under budget. They will be brought to you sometimes through the CEO report on a monthly basis. In some occasions where they're discretionary, they'll come through as part of the mid-year budget review. I would expect that there will be more things to come through. As part of that, there'll be some savings to offset that. There may be some risks that are realised that add to our, that mean that we don't have money available at that point as well.
Thank you. And one further question for me is around the bad and doubtful debts. I assume that's about Fines Victoria. Just looking at the forecast there, it's substantially lower than the actual. I'm just wondering, when do we update the forecast?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to take that one notice and provide a briefing to Council on that.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Gross to move the motion. Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, actually I'll reserve. There's nothing to say really that's been covered in the questions. This is money that's available, and I'll see if there's any violent objections to it.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Gross.
I don't wish to add. Thanks very much.
Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried.
Call a division on that, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Pearl has called for a division. So I'll ask everyone to vote again. All those in favour? That's Councillor Baxter, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Gross, Councillor Brand. All those against? Councillor Pearl and Councillor Voss. That motion is carried. So we'll move now to item 14.3, which is 129A Beaconsfield Parade, Albert Park, which is the feedback from the community survey. And we have no members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl?
My question's in relation to the 22-year, I think it's 22 years, life of the building. The buildings across the road, the houses were built in the early in 1905 or something to 1915 or thereabouts. I'm not exactly sure, but they've been there for 100 years and they seem to be doing okay. What have we analysed the root cause of why this building only lasted 22 years and is no longer fit for purpose?
Mr. Carroll.
I think there's a couple of points there. Firstly, what's been uncovered as part of the due diligence on several proposals that are put forward from the previous tenant. In his works, he uncovered some degradation in the structure, and in particular below the surface of where the structure goes into the ground, which meant that the useful life of the building is now come into question. It probably has got some time left in it, but not enough time for another long-term lease. The other part of it has developed in a piecemeal way. So it was designed initially as a kiosk. There was some works done to it, some staged works. The previous tenant did some initial works. He was planning to do more, but that was contingent on planning approvals and a further lease negotiation, which wasn't forthcoming. And as part of that, the building issues have also been identified requiring replacement of the building rather than just further upgrading and works around it.
Councillor Pearl.
But have we reviewed any way to make sure that this doesn't occur again?
I haven't at this stage, Madam Mayor. We can look at it. We didn't build the building. We did obviously go through permitting processes. This was done by prior tenants, but we can look at processes that we have in place if there's anything in addition that we need to do around the integrity of designs and the materials used, but they do go through planning permits and obviously normal building permit approval processes as well.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Brand.
With the survey, quite an impressively large survey result with quite a spectacular skew in one particular way. There seems to be quite a latent demand for beach volleyball, but it does indicate that there is a demand for beach volleyball. I wonder how we would handle the results of that survey in these circumstances. How much we discount things and how much we take notice of a survey like that.
Mr. Trail.
Through you, Madam Mayor, officers have a meeting in the month of December to work with beach volleyball, acknowledging that it's a operation that attracts a lot of visitors and a lot of participation from our community. So there is a meeting between officers and the beach volleyball operation to look at ways we can support that ongoing healthy operation.
Thanks, Mr. Trail. I'm curious about the parameters around a temporary operator. What are we looking for in a temporary operator?
Madam Mayor, officers are working at the moment to establish those parameters and whether it's an operator or some sort of other activation of the site for the short term, whilst the options for the medium and long term are developed.
Another question around thanking the residents for their responses. Is that going to go out via a letter? How are we going to do that?
Subject to councillors adopting the recommendation, officers plan to thank those participants of the survey who have provided their email addresses.
If we're unable to get a short-term leasee, would we consider a allowing the volleyball group in there, or is that prior to sort of coming up with those principles of it going forward a problem for how we go forward?
Madam Mayor, that's one option that will be considered.
Okay, thank you. All right. Councillor Crawford.
The reality of that space is this is peak time for any business to be in there, so I do fear that we might be too late in finding a temporary tenant for this summer, because once it goes into winter it is a much harder business to sustain, given that there may be something out of the box other than a cafe. I don't know that I've actually got a question. I guess I just have a concern. Do we go out to an EOI? Is that the next step in the process, or what is that? I know that we're looking for a temporary, but I know that there are principles being, I guess, aligned, but we're already at a point where they're missing their peak time. So what is that next step then? Is it soon? Is it go out to EOI?
Mr. Savinkov?
Through you, Madam Mayor, one of the fundamental challenges of that site or that location is its seasonality. Officers are aware of that. It's one of the challenges that we'll need to be considering for a longer-term use of the site. In terms of the short-term use of the site, a pop-up style operation is potentially feasible. That sort of occupancy wouldn't require the more elaborate, the larger expression of interest. But if we do proceed down that path, some sort of advertising of the opportunity is envisaged.
Mr. Savinkov, I'm just wondering what you think the survey is suggesting. So if we understand that the volleyball group, and they're a distinct group, and we understand what they're asking for, but if we took those people away, what is the rest of the community wanting there? We're seeing like less than 4% don't want a building there. There's a little bit of satisfaction with the building there. There seems to be people wanting more of something other than a kiosk or an eatery. Is that your interpretation, or what is it that you're thinking the rest of the community are asking for?
Madam Mayor, I wouldn't mean to speak on behalf of the community, but one key takeaway, as you've mentioned, is that the community, there is some satisfaction. There is a lot of satisfaction with having something there, but there's clearly a message that's coming through to us that increasing the community benefit from that site is important to the respondents.
And if I can add to that, Madam Mayor, I think also that there is some satisfaction with it being some kind of kiosk operation. So some kind of increased benefit with potentially some continued kiosk is what I read from the materials, and that the conversation that Mr. Savinkov and I have had as well. And that's one of the challenges in how you move this going forward on that kind of site, how you might get that mixed use. But I think seeing it turn into a much bigger kind of cafe is not something that I'm seeing being the general view of the feedback.
Mr. Savinkov, the recommendation doesn't give any timelines for this coming back, any timelines for any work being done, any timelines for anything. Maybe this is a question to you, Mr. Carroll, too. Do you think that the recommendation needs some strengthening there? I note that there is a timeline in the implementation strategy, but should it be in the recommendation?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we could include something in the recommendation subject to Mr Savinkov's advice around when we might bring something back to council. We are in the process of a bit of change in our property department and a range of other high-profile leases. We were hopeful of negotiating a short-term lease with the previous tenant, which would have helped negate the need for this next piece of work around finding a temporary pop-up or other use, which we're now putting our minds to. So I think I'd need a little bit of leeway in terms of the amount of what we can commit to next, but we are working actively on it. But we have got a fairly full program as well and some constrained resources at the moment. So, Mr Savinkov, is there...
So I guess my concern is it's just going to sit there because we're too busy. So just wanting to make sure that that doesn't happen and it doesn't slip off the agenda.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's definitely not what I'm saying. I'm just finding it hard to commit to a precise time frame. We're definitely working on it and we'll continue to work on it. I'd need more advice from my team about what they think is feasible in the short term. So can I take that on notice and come back to you? I don't think I'm going to be able to put something in the resolution tonight unless you...
Okay. Councillor Pearl, you had a question?
Yes, how feasible is a pop-up operation in the cafe? How much does the current tenant own in terms of fittings within the venue, including the woodwork on the roof, the basic machinery, the kitchen machinery, the benches, etc.?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the equipment in the premises is property of the tenant. The fit-out is essentially property of City of Port Phillip.
Mr Savinkov, the lease has expired and the tenant still has their property there? Why is that?
Madam Mayor, at the request of the tenant, there's been a short-term extension of the lease to allow for a smooth handover.
Councillor Crawford?
How long is that extension, firstly?
Madam Mayor, that extension is until this Friday.
I guess the next question I ask, I understand there is some work that needs to be done on the building, but in terms of its life, like without having to do major works on it, is it 5 years, is it 2 years? So it may not be a 15-year lease that it could be getting, but just a vague ballpark of how long it is in a condition that's safe, compliant and all of those things.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think we can anticipate the physical lifespan of that building, assuming it gets ordinary maintenance, of at least a few years. But as with any other property asset, the obsolescence of it is often challenged not by its physical lifespan, but by other things, for instance, its functionality or legal compliance.
Any further questions, councillors? Mr Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just responding to your question previously, in the report it does say that we would bring back a report to council in February. So I can work with our governance people to include that in the resolution if you would like.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Thank you, and that would be an officer's recommendation. Thank you. Councillors, any further question on to 129A Beaconsfield Parade? If not, we have an officer's alternative recommendation that's just been updated on the screen there. It's in red, which includes notes that a further report will be brought back to Council in February 2019 on this matter. Do I have a mover? Councillor Baxter to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, I mean, the motion already says to thank the community for getting involved. I suppose I wasn't sure what to expect from the response, but it seems as though there is a spirited response in terms of beach sports users. But also just, there is a general feeling from the community that they want to increase the community use of the space. So I think that's actually an exciting opportunity to figure out, well, how can we do that? What can we do? What are the options here? I think that people appreciate there being kiosks down by the beach, but, sort of perhaps another sort of cafe is something they can forego if there's some greater community facility there. And I also note as well that the submissions, a smaller amount about inclusion / égalité. I'm not sure why the French word is used there, but it's that's also something that I think we should always be thinking about in terms of our community space, particularly such a fantastic one right there on the beach. The more egalitarian we can make that space, the better, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Gross.
Look, I just want to repeat that this has been an extraordinarily well patronised in terms of 500 people. That shocks me. This asset, I was there, I'm to blame. It's not a great design. Could be far more exciting, but we'll see what comes out through the process. But clearly the community is embracing the idea that this is a place for a community facility and a hospitality facility, and we'll see what happens throughout the process. I'd like to thank the officers for running the questionnaire.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Crawford.
I will accept the survey and acknowledge it. I am really disappointed that we've got to this point where we don't have a leasing. For many reasons, I personally was not in favour of going to this. I think sometimes with spaces we try to do too much that's not feasible in a very small space, and I think this is one of them. I don't think you can actually have a viable business that's very seasonal and also provide community benefit. And I think we had a very successful business that had been in there and wanted to stay. I'm not saying that anything about that process, but I wanted to support a currently successful business in our city, and I feel that personally, that going to a survey for a small space that, that ultimately the cost is going to come back on us now, because if it goes to be a community space, it's not going to cover any costs of any upgrades or anything like that. So I think we've just added to our burden of an asset to maintain in a much greater way at this point in time. Who knows what the future may bring. And I think in this case, going out to consultation, I think we're asking this little space to be much more than it actually can deliver. And I hear the views of the community. I do think it is very skewed, and I think the community probably would have just been as happy to continue having a tenant providing a great cafe as well. So, yeah, I guess I'm very disappointed in this overall outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Brand.
I'm going to vote for this, support this motion, but I'm going to say something a little bit similar or related to Councillor Crawford. I just note that quite a lot of people in the survey said keep it the same, we love it with the way it is and with the current operators and what have you. And I just wanted to just say a note of, I guess, thanks to our previous tenant there for many years of running a pretty popular place and doing it with a lot of, enthusiasm and creativity and dedication, and thank you very much for that.
Councillor Pearl?
All we've achieved through this process is trashing a treasured business that was much loved by a local community and, albeit not particularly profitable from what we were hearing from the tenant, reasonably sustainable. We've overcomplicated the process, and the way we trashed this business was by doing too little too late. This process, if we had done this, should have been done many, many years ago. And this process is already producing underwhelming results, as you've heard from my fellow councillors. I would strongly suggest that the fellow councillors send a clear signal tonight that we don't accept this. We've overcomplicated this process. We need to simplify it and get that space back to a working space. Vote this down. We're trying to make it look like we're doing something here, and all it's going to do is cost us more money in the future and get a worse outcome. We've trashed a treasured business, and we should be ashamed of ourselves. Vote it down.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? I will briefly. We had the previous tenant come and speak to us, and he had a terrific business. The previous tenant had grand plans for that building and wanted to knock it down and build something bigger there. And it is incumbent upon us as a council to find out from the community what they actually want there. And perhaps the timing wasn't right. In fact, I don't think it was. But I do think that we need to go through a proper process of ensuring that we cross our T's and dot our I's, rather than just sort of say, yep, you're a good business, so you can do whatever you want there. So it is important that we went through the process. Unfortunately, there was a casualty in this process. So it is unfortunate, but I do think that we need to look at the whole process of what's occurred and not just a little bit of it. Councillor Baxter, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. Now we'll go to item 14.4, which is a new lease for the Port Melbourne Yacht Club. Councillor Baxter?
I, Councillor Tim Baxter, declare that in relation to item 14.4, new lease Port Melbourne Yacht Club, that I have an indirect conflict of interest due to the receipt of an applicable gift in this matter. I'll be leaving the chamber for that.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll see you shortly. Now, Councillors, we've got one person that's requested to speak to this item. Mr Paul Letchinger, please. Welcome. You pop on the microphone, state your name and suburb,
Hi.
please.
Yep, my name is Paul Leitinger. I'm a resident of Albert Park, and I'm also the current Commodore of the Port Melbourne Yacht Club. I'm here today to ask you to support the amendment which is before you regarding the funding arrangement negotiated as part of our new lease. As you may know, but worth repeating, our club is over 125 years old, circa 1889 I think it is, and in that time we have not requested or needed any external funding to maintain and run our club. However, the bad news is that those times have unfortunately come to an end, temporarily at least. It is also worth mentioning that we are a volunteer-run club. The last year or two have proven to be very challenging for us, with a bevy of items competing for funds, such as replacement of one of our rescue boats, the replacement and repair of our timber deck structures, one which is used by the function centre people there. We haven't replaced them yet, but we've done temporary repairs. The third one is the repair of the storage shed, which has also had a bit of an asbestos issue. And on top of these capital items, our long-term subtenant gave notice terminating their contract earlier this year, so we've lost their input to our funding. All of the above items have been assessed, and a forecast capital requirement and cash flow has been made and presented to Council, or your officers. And it was based on this work that a proposal was made to request $150,000 be made available in 2019 budget year, that is not tied to the success of the club in obtaining other grants. This would certainly help us to ensure we have sufficient funds to deal with the immediate needs. The remaining funds in Lease would remain tied to those state grants being obtained. Currently, we are in the process to select the new function centre manager, and this should be finalised prior to Christmas with an MOU put in place, and then we'll prepare a lease once we have our lease with the council finalised. The team at Port Melbourne, of course, are proud of the work we do in supporting and being part of the community, and we see a bright future in helping to provide sporting opportunities for our rapidly growing local population. In fact, I sort of see it as essential, really. We can't afford to disappear. Finally, we have had a number of meetings with the council officers and presented our case for consideration, and we are pleased that they have put forward this proposal for your approval. So I ask that you give this your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Leitinger. Councillors, do you have any questions of the Commodore or of officers? Councillor Crawford? Is it okay if we ask you questions directly? Thank you.
I guess I just note in the recommendation that the Port Melbourne Yacht Club would put a capital investment of $625 million within the first 5 years of this 10-year lease, but it's contingent on council and state government funding. How much are you seeking from the state government? Is that investment completely reliant on state government funding, or is it that a large proportion of that amount would come from the yacht club itself?
We currently have in the order of $500,000 in our accounts. The lease, the way it was originally written, was we asked for $300,000 from the council, and the council officers put forward that we would be given that from the council if we also got $300,000 from the state government grant. So we have been talking with the local member in Albert Park, Port Melbourne, and we are, I think, aligned, and we're certainly going to give everything we can to go and get those funds. So with that, plus our function centre manager coming on board early in the new year, we hope that that'll give our funds a big boost again, so that we should be able to cover that monies over that period.
Councillor Pearl?
So how much government funding are you seeking from them?
It's the same, well, it was the same, $300,000.
So no more, but that doesn't get you the 1.625 million. So give me the exact numbers that you. So there's a 500, there's a $320,000 gap. You're going to fill that with the lease?
Yes, our next tenant. I mean, we can't sort of say what the numbers are in public, but with the funds that will come in from our function centre, plus just our normal operating, we more or less cover our operating costs just with our memberships and storage of boats, and then the function centre monies actually allow us to put some money in the bank for capital investments.
Councillor Gross?
Commodore, how many? Can you recall what proportion of your members and your active members are local Port Phillip people?
Yes, just from memory, we actually did those numbers. I think it was 40% were in the local area. Port Melbourne, Albert Park, South Melbourne, and then the rest of the members come usually from the north and north east, because we would be their local club. Yeah, their local club. So yeah. Essendon, Nidgeri,
Yarra, Melbourne.
Yes, a quadrant, basically north and then off to the east. Yes.
Thank you.
Commodore, I have a question as well around community benefit. In my experience, the most significant community benefit, apart from outside the sailing, is the use of the function room downstairs for fundraisers for certain not-for-profit groups, schools and things like that. I note that that's not listed as one of the community benefits. Is that something that you would still offer?
Yes, in fact, I've just sent in a letter today to your officers just sort of trying to outline the community benefits that we perceive, which are everything from a Discover Sailing Days that we have on a monthly basis, as well as the main one that Yachting Australia organises and then each club runs, plus the sailing schools that we run twice a year in the season. And then there are these other ad hoc functions where you have community groups coming in. And one of our things we would certainly like to do is to try and restructure the club's accessibility to enable members of the public to get to the building, because at the moment we're behind a big fence and there's no other way to get in other than having a key.
Councillor Pearl?
I'm intrigued to see why, if you these works had some lead time to you knowing that they were going to have to happen. How are you going to stop yourself getting into this similar situation where you get this confluence of events? I understand you've lost your tenant, but that's known for some years that tenant was experiencing some difficulties, and they've done very similar things on a number of other venues around Melbourne over the past several years. So I'm just wondering, have you improved your way you're planning and processing so you don't get yourselves into these financial difficulties in the future?
Look, as far as the tenant goes, we were not aware of their difficulties outside of our club because they'd been prompt in their payments over many years. We certainly did notice that they hadn't been as vigorous in their marketing of the venue in the last few years, so maybe that was a sign we should have picked up on. As far as the structures around the club, the decking, the timber decking, was put together mainly by members using old telephone poles and all sorts of things. So as far as an engineering design, they were not really adequate, and so they've been in place between 20 to 25 years, and they are basically, rotten. But the future, the replacement of those things would be done to an engineering standard which would be suitable for marine environment, which we would expect you would get at least 50 years, and then with maintenance you could get well beyond that as well. So once we have replaced it, that should not be an issue. But I mean, one of the things that we are going to need to work with the council for is you've got a foreshore plan, and the works that we intend to do on the club and how we might expand it for future needs to be done in conjunction with the council, so that we don't spend money on something which doesn't fit a plan that you may have for the bigger foreshore, picture. Does that answer your question? I mean, we do have a cash flow that goes out actually to 2050 something, where we've tried to map all the costs and capital replacement values for our capital items. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Commodore. You can take a seat. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers on this report? Councillor Gross.
Mr Carroll, I'm in favour of this. I think it's a good report. But I do want to ask some direct questions about some of the money. So the rent of $8,000, which is a significant subsidy, and we hear that 40% of the members are locals. To justify that level of subsidy, I want to be able to know a few things. And one, the retention of the asset after 10 years, the possibility of marking the rent to more closely to market, and the possibility that if the subtenancy is successful, and it could be incredibly successful because it's a beautiful place to have that sort of business. If it's successful, could there be some clawback of any of the subsidy, both cash and rent foregone? So they're the three issues.
Thank you, Mr Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I'll try to remember each of those issues. I might start with the
Start with the subsidy, perhaps.
Start with the subsidy. So there's a couple of issues at play here. The Yacht Club had proposed a 21-year lease term. We did not support that as officers because the level of capital investment wasn't substantial enough, and it was also because we were concerned about the financial viability, sustainability of the club into the future. We believe that the level of rent at the moment does two things. A, on a shorter term lease for 10 years, it enables the club to build up its financial position to ensure it can take care of those assets and its responsibilities under the lease. The second part is that it keeps us below the Retail Leases Act, which would otherwise require us to take on the maintenance building and the structural maintenance obligations under the building. So we've agreed to reduce the rent to that level to keep us under the Retail Leases Act to ensure that the club maintains responsibility for the assets that it built, but also in reducing the rent they have the capacity to build up their financial capability to maintain those assets. Now, in not agreeing to it going beyond 10 years, it gives us good time to work with the club to ensure they are financially sustainable.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Happy to move. Okay, Councillor Gross, happy to move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, I will, Madam Mayor. Look, this club is an adornment of the foreshore. You know, fantastic people from the community get together. I think you run the J-boats, don't you? You know, which are extraordinary heritage boats. You know, there's so much to love about the Port Melbourne Yacht Club. They have a building that's perfect for both yachting activities and for raising funds from a really efficient subtenant. So it's got a lot of good things in place. I just, just naturally nervous and squeamish about the level of subsidy, but I sort of want to thank the officers for making it so transparent about the level of subsidy. I think that's great. I sort of take the view that we have some capital city obligations, which means that we have to take some of our parking money and plough it into assets which service people outside the city and give our clubs critical mass, give our coastal businesses visitors, and add to the vibrancy of this city. So the fact that 60% don't live here doesn't mean that it's a punitive burden on our community. It's just one of the things we have to take into account. So we are being asked in this lease to take in, to give considerable subsidy. But I really take on board Mr. Carroll's answer about the length of the lease. It is only 10 years and significant investment is being made by the club. So in the warp and weave of life, you trade off length of tenancy for the level of subsidy that we're given. I think what I'll be looking for is, and I remember, I don't know if you remember Mr. Feathers, who was one of those great club people who put sweated blood to get that building initially up, and we're incredibly grateful for these club members who do this, and they've left us a legacy that's in a very challenging place that makes materials corrode and buildings depreciate. So, in the end, I look at the capital investment that's going to be made, the shortness of the lease, the vibrancy it adds to our foreshore, and I've convinced myself that I'm happy with the work that the club and officers have done to balance the benefits for the community with the costs of the subsidy. And I just urge everyone, both in the community and of course in the club, that we make these outreach activities, which are listed under 3.1.7 as community benefits, really make those deliver to the community. I really want to be able to say at the end of the 10 years, should I be still alive, that this club, yes, they got a significant subsidy, yes, only 40% from the city, but yes, they really ploughed a lot of effort back into the community, and we get an asset that's only 10 years old since its revivification. So, yeah, I came into this as a bit of a sceptic, but now I'm a convert, and I urge councillors to support this balanced recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the motion?
I just agree with everything Councillor Gross says, so I won't add to it. But yes.
Wow. Councillor Pearl.
Don't really know what to say now. Now I've got the ability to speak. I think in the next 10 years, I don't think now's the right time to do this. I think the length is right, but I think in the next 10 years, it's incumbent upon the club to come up with a greater vision for this site in tandem with council. I think the business model of the club potentially for the last 100 years isn't going to work for the next 100 years, and there's a real potential for this site to open it up vastly to the community and also come up with some form of different income model that future-proofs your club and also makes it a bit more accessible to, I know you've got boats stored, I think, at different locations. So maybe there's some way, shape or form we could put some form of permanent structure of a marina in the front of where the club is and open it up in some way. That's going to take a very long time to get a community on board and to plan that out, and it's going to take a lot of funding. But if you get it right, potentially that could secure your future well beyond the lives of the people sitting in this room. I'm okay with what's proposed here, but you are receiving a very large subsidy, and I feel for groups such as I keep on saying the Port Phillip Coast Guard, who we don't support anywhere near this, and they do pretty amazing work for our 11 kilometres of coastline, protecting it, as well as the Greater Bay, etc. And I'm not sure if they service you, etc. But we don't provide that group any form of meaningful subsidy, and they had to go build and maintain their own buildings and their boats, etc. So you're probably feeling a little bit of the cold from me today about the level of subsidy, albeit okay to run that for a period of time, but please use this as an opportunity to see if you can rework in the next 10 years about how your club looks going forward and what the funding of that looks like, and come up with a bold, ambitious plan, because I think your location is quite special in that obviously you're adjacent to directly a community, but there's no residents necessarily that directly overlook that property. So it's a real opportunity where, I'm not suggesting you build a 5-storey building on it, but it's a real opportunity where you could probably do something there with the wider community would be supportive without the local, the immediate community being upset about potentially doing something there. So it's a huge opportunity for you going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak? Now, I'll also briefly take an opportunity, and I'll be supporting the recommendation tonight. But I think the Port Melbourne Yacht Club has an amazing opportunity which it hasn't never been fully or even explored properly. For a start off, it's right at the end of Bay Street, and as you're driving down Bay Street, all you see is a big shed, and that shed is not very beautiful and has an opportunity to be so much better. You've got the front, which is usually parked with trailers and junk, so that has an opportunity to alter. We've got a big mesh fence, and I've always, and in conjunction with the club many years ago, think that there was an opportunity to do some sort of land swap around the side so that the side could get access, emergency access from the water. But I understand that DWELP has sort of pushed that idea away. But I also long for seeing the plans come to life, which shows the waterfront plan being the pier that runs alongside, which goes a bit to Councillor Pearl's plans, because the community has been brought along there and has approved the pier to run side should it be rebuilt in the future. Very happy with the community benefit as is outlined here. I think one of the best ones is the opportunity for many of the groups in our community to use the space that's there for their own fundraising. It's probably one of the most beautiful places during the day and the evening in our city. And I would certainly like to see it more accessible, as you've pointed out. So it's not a great look, and I think we can do a lot better, and hopefully we can plan that together. So, good luck with all of that. Councillor Gross, would you like to close?
Look, I would. I just want to take up Councillor Pearl's invitation to have a broad vision. We're looking at boating at the other end of the municipality in the St Kilda Marina, and what I've learnt from that is that boating is going to be a big part of the Victorian landscape for the foreseeable future, probably forever. And that, I think Councillor Pearl was saying, let's spend a decade unleashing the imagination about the opportunities and, of course, the costs and disbenefits that will be rudely brought to your attention should you embark on some 10-year plan. But, I really like what Councillor Pearl said, so I just wanted to close by emphasising that is the length of vision that we should be both taking in relation to this precious site.
Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. I'll ask Councillor Baxter to come back in. And we'll go to item 15 now. So that's the end of the reports, which is notices of motion. And councillors, we have no notices of motion tonight. Item 16, which is reports by councillor delegates. Councillors, do we have any reports tonight? No? Then we'll move to item of urgent business, and we've got one item of urgent business tonight, and I need a mover and a seconder to consider the item in relation to bringing forward the commencement time of the 5th of December 2018 ordinary meeting. Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Baxter to second. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. So I now call on a councillor to move that a motion in relation to urgent business. So the council moves the commencement time of the 5th of December 2018 ordinary meeting of council from 6:30 to 6 p.m. and gives public notice of this change in the Port Phillip Leader and on the council website. Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Baxter to second. Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then
No,
I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Councillors, are there any other items of urgent business? If not, we have a confidential item, which is relating to the St Kilda Marina interim lease approach. So I'd like to call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to the members of the public. So Councillor Brand has moved, Councillor Gross has seconded, so that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with Section 89(2)D of the Local Government Act 1989, as the item relates to a contractual matter. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously.